G'day everyone, I hope you're doing well in this uneasy time in the world. I've been stuck inside for a fair while now, but don't worry, this is my natural habitat and that's where I thrive, so we're all good. Now today I wanted to have a look at a game that is very close to my heart, and that is Diablo 3. Diablo 3 was launched in 2012 and was greatly anticipated by the hordes of followers from the Diablo 2 game, which is arguably the best game of the franchise depending on who you talk to of course. The original Diablo games were some of the first and most memorable action RPGs in the genre, and it has set the groundwork for many other games that have come out since. But nevertheless, Diablo 3 was a long awaited and fans had high hopes for the game that was to come. I personally really enjoyed Diablo 3. I had never played D2, nor had I played any other real action RPG games at the time, apart from maybe Baldur's Gate 3 on Xbox. For me, this was a new experience and a fantastic and exciting game. Something I do find interesting is the relationship between players and their opinion in the games that they play. The more games that someone has played, the more critical they are of the next that they play. This may be due to factors such as that there are aspects of other games that they simply prefer, or they like the style of other games, but in the end it allows players to have a much more well-rounded view of games in a genre. They are able to compare them and their experiences within them. For a lot of people, Diablo 3 did not hit the mark, but that's okay. Generally you will find people like and dislike different things. And I thought this was the case with Diablo 3. However, after playing for years and years, season upon season, it just became really repetitive. So as you do from bad relationships, you take a break and reassess and try other things. In the time that I took away from the game, I have played other action RPG games, and the most notable of these would be Path of Exile. The way that the developers treat Path of Exile is how I wish every other game company would treat their own games. Especially how I wish Blizzard had have treated Diablo. They're constantly adding new elements such as items and skills and class changes, new content, and so much more to the game. So on that note, let's talk about what Diablo 3 has and what it needs to compete with the other large names in the action RPG genre. For a long time, Diablo was simply leveling 1 to 60 in a story mode, which had increasing difficulties. The game at this point was very basic. Players had very little power and chance to get much stronger outside of new item upgrades. This was the case until the expansion that was released on the 25th of March 2014. This expansion, called Reaper of Souls, brought with it the systems and gameplay that we know in today's current game. Along with the opportunity to level up to 70, Reaper of Souls also brought with it the Crusader class, Act 5, the adventure mode setting, blood shards, new gems, new legendary items of course, and also with this there were the Nephilim rifts and Greater rifts. On top of those systems were the leaderboard systems that came in, allowing players to view and track who had done the fastest runs with what class and in what time. These were all fantastic and welcome changes. Something to note about Blizzard's design philosophy in relation to Diablo 3. They've stated that they don't ever want to make anyone feel weaker when playing a character that has the same gear as the previous season. In short, what they said was they will never nerf anything, they will just keep increasing the power level of everything else. Therefore, as time has gone on and seasons have started and seasons have ended, Blizzard has inevitably buffed and changed sets and items within the game. But due to this design philosophy, nothing has ever gotten weaker. Although I understand not wanting to play something that feels weaker just after a season of it being the strongest build in the game, surely you have to expect this action from the developers who would be revising to set back to say at least a normal level. But no, instead they just buffed the sets more and more. This created a huge power spike within the players every season, and it has allowed for groups to be pushing the highest grade of rifts much earlier than it has previously been possible each season. The ultimately frustrating thing about this too is the fact that what is strong dictates what spec and what class you will generally play. I myself have done this before and said no. I want to play this class and get this set of gear because I think it looks fun and I just want to enjoy myself. But funnily enough, I didn't. It isn't fun not being as strong as your friends or people in your group, and struggling through content that you could easily be cleared in another build is nowhere near as much fun. This is one of the fatal flaws that D3 suffers from. Obviously, not every build and spec in Path of Exile is viable and the absolute strongest. but the massive talent tree, the ascendancies, and the amazing gearing and crafting system allow you to create builds that are not exactly the meta, but you will still be able to clear a vast majority of the content. But you can see what I mean. You can play what you want and be viable in the game. I'm not saying the strongest build, I'm just saying viable and able to clear the content that you want to. The good thing about having set pieces in D3 is that it allows it to be quite simple and easy to pick up. It's easy to understand and create a build around it, and this is good for new players. However, this creates a set path for the players. It doesn't allow for any creativity or new gameplay or any change of play style. The frustration of this is also compounded with the RNG loot system. Now don't get me wrong, RNG loot systems are fine for games like this. However, it is extremely frustrating when one piece can make or break your entire build. Without a certain set item, your character is so weak. It's almost like they don't have any gear on at all. Then suddenly, once you get one item, you can almost one-shot everything up to the start of the real endgame. Whether you have ancient or primal or normal items, it doesn't matter. Those damage multipliers aren't the bulk of where your power comes from. It's from the percentage boost from the sets and the certain items that allow the massive power spikes. So the gearing and the sets aside, what D3 has done really well, in my opinion, is the rifts and the greater rifts. Now when I say really well, I'm talking about the initial implementation and the effect that they had on the game. I mean, the system was so popular that Blizzard based their Mythic Plus in Retail World of Warcraft off this design. The basic concept being that each level of the instance would become harder and harder each level, providing greater rewards. The difficulty increase in the case of greater rifts was only by health and damage percentage from the mobs. The abilities that the elites and bosses had did not change, which is something that Blizzard revisited in the Mythic Plus adaptation with the different affixes each week. These dungeons are fun, and with the timed aspect they become more competitive and more engaging. However, for me they lose their charm once you start getting to a much higher level. The health scaling just becomes stupid, and even killing the white mobs takes so long. Now, some would argue that at this level the gameplay probably becomes more advanced, trying to group up and select which mobs to kill, but for me this is not. This is just boring and it's pretty lame. I've gone from smashing everything to slowly killing mobs and barely making the timer. For me, this is just as if I was playing at the lowest level of gameplay. And I know this happens in all games, but not to such a noticeable extent as in the higher level greater rifts. Now the crafting systems in the game are basically what you would expect from such a game. There's an enchanter, mystic, jewel crafter, and they're all pretty straightforward and simple. My gripe with the crafting system, however, is with the blacksmith. So as soon as you hit level 70, this becomes obsolete. The only service that he does provide is to either repair or break the gear that you have, which essentially isn't that much considering there's so much time and money spent initially leveling it all up. I really wish Blizzard had have added some more gear or patterns or something useful to use in the endgame from the blacksmith and make these mountains of resources that we're gathering from breaking the legendaries and other items that we get worthwhile. And this leads me on to my final point as to why I've stopped playing Diablo 3. Since the expansion of the Reaper of Souls that was released in 2014, the game has been largely untouched. Blizzard has done nothing to keep the game alive. Admittedly, they have added seasonal buffs and effects, but this is just a cheap and pathetic rip-off of the seasons that Grinding Gear games in their game Path of Exile have also released. These seasonal effects alone are not enough. This last season they've added a few more sets for a couple of classes, but that is not enough to keep the player base engaged. I know that Blizzard has pulled a lot of people off the D3 team in order to work on Diablo Immortals and Diablo 4, but with that, I am surprised that they have left the game to rot, with minimal updates and no real maintenance. Surely they must notice that there is a loyal fan base who are wanting more. The time between Diablo game releases are so long. Is it just the fact that Blizzard doesn't care about the franchise anymore? Or are they so confident that the fan base will return and keep loving and playing these games? They know they don't have to provide any major content for around a decade, or at least between games. Or, God forbid, the way that gaming companies are going now is it because there are no microtransactions in it. We've already seen it with Heroes of the Storm, we've seen it in Hearthstone, we've seen it in World of Warcraft now, even in the shop, able to buy gold, able to buy game time. Will Diablo 4 go down that same path? I certainly hope not, but I mean, games such as Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 where it's a purchase one time and forget about it, they're not so popular anymore. Gaming companies have realized that they can keep dragging money out of people. So it leaves it up to a big question of how they will go about it in the future. But with all that said and done, let me know what you think, guys. Are you still playing Diablo 3? Are you waiting for Diablo 4? Or are you just waiting for Diablo Immortals to play on the toilet? Let me know in the comments. Catch me streaming on twitch.tv/auraparty, and thank you.